Hello everyone, welcome back to Midnight Creaks. In this new segment, we are opening Redacted Files, sealed accounts from small Alaskan towns that were never meant to be heard beyond their frozen borders. Tonight, we venture into the last frontier, a land of endless winter, isolated outposts, and secrets the permafrost was never supposed to release. In this episode, you will hear 6 of the most disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories ever recorded. These include mass sightings along the water, a classified homestead outside Bethel, and a reality-bending incident on the Seward Peninsula that left hardened men and women doubting their own sanity. Each file has been painstakingly rebuilt from witness testimonies, leaked reports, and fragments of documents that were quietly buried instead of explained. Names and specific landmarks have been altered to protect those who still live in the shadows of these towns. But the events themselves remain exactly as they were described. If you are ready to uncover what truly haunts the Alaskan wilderness, subscribe to Midnight Creaks for your daily dose of the unexplained, and hit that notification bell. Because out here, silence is often the last warning you get. In October 2014, federal authorities closed access to a 50-acre homestead 6 miles outside Bethel, Alaska. The official explanation cited geological instability and environmental concerns. The real reason remains classified. What happened on that property between 2012 and 2014 defies every rational framework investigators tried to apply to it. 5 people disappeared from the same location under circumstances that should be impossible, and security footage captured something that no one has been able to explain. The Yakupov family had owned the homestead since 1998. Boris Yakupov, a commercial fisherman in his early 50s, purchased the land as a subsistence base for hunting and fishing. His wife Katrina managed the property while raising their 3 children. The homestead sat in a shallow valley bordered by spruce forest on 3 sides and tundra to the north. It was remote but not isolated. A gravel road connected it to Bethel proper, and 2 neighboring properties lay within a half-mile radius. The Yakupovs were known as reliable, practical people. Boris served on the local search and rescue volunteer team. Katrina taught traditional Yupik crafts at the community center. They were the last family anyone would associate with unexplained phenomena. The first disappearance occurred on August 17, 2012. Their daughter, Anya, 15 years old, left the main house at 3 p.m. to walk to the Reinhardt property half a mile south. She planned to help their neighbor with berry picking. Anya had made the walk dozens of times. She carried a cell phone and a 2-way radio. The weather was clear, temperature in the mid-60s, visibility unlimited. She never arrived. When the Reinhardts called at 4 p.m. asking where Anya was, Katrina assumed a simple miscommunication. She walked the path herself, calling Anya's name. Nothing. Boris returned from town at 5 p.m. and immediately organized a search. By 6 p.m., 12 volunteers were combing the property and surrounding forest. They found Anya's phone on the path, approximately 300 yards from the house. It was lying face up in the center of the trail, undamaged, battery at 70%. Her radio was discovered 20 yards further, also undamaged and functional. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leaving the trail, no disturbance in the vegetation on either side. The search expanded over the following week. State troopers brought in tracking dogs, which followed Anya's scent to the exact spot where her phone was found and then lost the trail completely. Thermal imaging flights detected nothing. The family's anguish was compounded by the absence of any logical explanation. Anya had simply ceased to exist between 2 points on a well-traveled path in broad daylight. The case remained open but unsolved. Then, on June 3, 2013, it happened again. Dmitry Sokolov, Boris's nephew, was visiting from Anchorage. He was 22, a geology student conducting a summer survey project in the region. On the evening of June 3rd, Dmitry left through the back door of the main house to walk to the property's front gate, where he'd parked his truck. The distance was approximately 200 yards across open ground. Katrina was in the kitchen and saw him leave. She glanced out the window 30 seconds later and he was gone. His truck was still at the gate. He had vanished in the time it took to cross the yard. This time, Boris insisted on bringing in outside help immediately. A trooper named Graham Sinclair responded within 2 hours. Sinclair was a 12-year veteran with extensive experience in wilderness search and rescue. He took the case seriously, documenting every detail and organizing an immediate grid search. At 11 p.m., while walking the property with a flashlight and a handheld GPS unit, Sinclair radioed his position to the command post set up near the house. He reported he was approaching a natural depression in the landscape approximately 150 yards northeast of the main house. His final transmission was calm and procedural. "I'm at the depression now. Ground looks stable. I'm going to..." The radio went silent. When search teams reached Sinclair's last known position 10 minutes later, they found his flashlight on the ground, still on. His GPS unit was beside it, showing his final coordinates. His vehicle was at the property entrance. His weapon was still holstered at his side. Graham Sinclair had disappeared exactly like the others. The state immediately escalated the response. A joint task force arrived within 24 hours, bringing sophisticated equipment and forensic specialists. They established a perimeter and began systematic documentation of every square foot of the property. That's when they noticed the pattern. All 3 disappearances had occurred within a specific area. When investigators plotted the locations on a map, they formed a rough circle approximately 150 yards in diameter. The center point was the natural depression where Sinclair had vanished. A shallow bowl in the landscape about 30 feet across and 5 feet deep at its center. Nothing about the depression looked unusual. No unusual vegetation, no visible geological features. Just a slight dip in otherwise level ground. Boris made the decision then to install security cameras. He purchased 8 high-definition cameras with night vision and motion activation, positioning them to cover every approach to and from the house. The cameras were commercial grade, the kind used by businesses and parking facilities. They recorded continuously to a digital system in the house. If something was happening on his property, Boris intended to document it. The cameras captured 2 more disappearances. On September 8, 2013, at 6:45 a.m., a postal contractor named Felicia Montgomery arrived to deliver a package. She parked her vehicle at the gate and walked toward the house carrying the package. Camera 4, mounted on the northwest corner of the house, had a clear view of her approach. The footage shows Montgomery walking normally along the path, her movements casual and unhurried. At 6:47 a.m. and 16 seconds, she takes a step forward. Her body is fully visible in frame, well lit by early morning sun. Between one frame and the next, a gap of 1/30th of a second, she ceases to exist. Not vanishes off camera, not collapses, not runs away. She is present in one frame and completely absent in the next. The package she was carrying falls to the ground where she had been standing. It hits the earth and bounces once, exactly as it would if someone had suddenly released it from waist height. The footage continues for another hour before someone notices the abandoned package and calls it in. The fifth disappearance occurred on February 11th, 2014. Lena Kozloff, a family friend and legal advocate, came to the property to help the Yakupovs with documentation for their insurance claims and legal proceedings related to the earlier disappearances. She arrived at 2 p.m. and left at 4:15 p.m. Camera 6 covering the driveway recorded her walking to her car. She reaches her vehicle, opens the driver's side door, and pauses, appearing to check something in her purse. Then she closes the door again and begins walking back toward the house, as if she'd forgotten something. At 4:17 p.m. and 42 seconds, while crossing through the same circular area where the others had disappeared, she blinks out of existence. One frame she is walking. The next frame, the path is empty. The footage from all the cameras was immediately seized by federal investigators. Experts from the FBI's Forensic Video Analysis Unit examined every frame. They tested for digital manipulation, compression artifacts, timestamp inconsistencies, and optical illusions. Their report, later obtained through legal channels, concluded that the footage showed no evidence of tampering or technical malfunction. What the cameras recorded appeared to be exactly what happened: people vanishing from physical existence while under direct observation. A geological survey team arrived in March 2014. They brought ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, and seismic imaging equipment. The focus was the depression at the center of the disappearance zone. Initial scans revealed something beneath it, a void or structure approximately 40 feet below the surface. The returns were inconsistent. Subsequent scans produced different images. One technician described it as trying to focus a camera on something that keeps changing shape. The underground feature refused to resolve into a clear picture. A decision was made to excavate. On April 2nd, 2014, a contractor crew began digging at the edge of the depression under the supervision of federal geologists. The excavation proceeded normally for the first 6 feet. Then equipment began malfunctioning. A diesel excavator's hydraulics seized without warning. A backup machine suffered an electrical fire. Hand tools broke. A worker operating a pneumatic drill reported that the bit encountered resistance, like he was drilling into rubber rather than soil. By the end of the first day, 3 pieces of heavy equipment were non-functional, and 2 workers had reported severe headaches and disorientation. The excavation was suspended. On April 18, 2014, federal authorities informed the Yakupov family that their property was being seized under eminent domain. The official explanation cited potential sinkhole formation and environmental contamination risks. The family was relocated to Anchorage with compensation and non-disclosure agreements. The homestead was absorbed into protected federal land management. Access was restricted. Warning signs were posted citing geological instability. No official investigation report has ever been released to the public. The 5 missing persons cases remain open and unsolved. Graham Sinclair is still listed as an active duty trooper on unpaid leave. The other 4 are classified as missing persons with no leads. In the years since the closure, There have been 7 additional disappearances of hikers and outdoors enthusiasts in the general region around Bethel. None have been officially connected to the homestead cases. Local search and rescue teams report certain coordinates where they will not conduct ground searches, preferring aerial observation only. The Yakupov family has never spoken publicly about what happened on their property. Boris Yakupov died in 2019. Katrina still lives in Anchorage. When asked about Anya, she reportedly says only that some places are not meant for people, and that the ground itself can have intentions we cannot comprehend. The security footage remains in federal custody. Frame-by-frame analysis has been conducted by multiple agencies, none of whom can explain what the cameras recorded. There is a geographical location in Alaska where the normal rules of physical existence appear to break down, where people can take a step forward and never complete it, where the space between one moment and the next can swallow human beings without trace or logic. The homestead sits empty now, slowly reclaimed by the Alaskan wilderness. The cameras still stand on the house, their lenses pointed at paths no one walks anymore. Whatever lies beneath that depression in the earth remains undisturbed, waiting in the darkness with a patience that outlasts human curiosity and courage. 5 people entered that blind spot and were erased from the world. The only certainty is that the circle remains, and the question of what it guards or what it feeds upon stays unanswered. Some boundaries should not be crossed, even when they look like nothing more than open ground on a clear day. In the middle of July 2010, something impossible happened at the Bristol Bay Cannery in Dillingham, Alaska. 23 workers on the night shift filed identical incident reports within the span of 40 minutes. Each report described the same vision, experienced simultaneously at 2:17 a.m. Each worker used nearly the same phrases. Each described ancestral fishing grounds they had never seen. Each mentioned figures in traditional indigenous dress beckoning them towards something they couldn't quite name. By the end of that week, all 23 would be gone. Dillingham sits at the northern edge of Bristol Bay, a town of fewer than 2,500 permanent residents that swells to nearly double that during salmon processing season. The Bristol Bay Cannery was the largest employer in the region, bringing in seasonal workers from across Alaska and the lower 48 states every summer since 1952. For 58 years, it operated without serious incident. Workers came for the brutal hours and decent pay, processed millions of pounds of sockeye and king salmon, then left when the season ended in late August. The 2010 season started like any other. The facility employed 150 workers split across 3 shifts. The night shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the processing lines moved fastest, and the Alaskan summer sun barely dipped below the horizon. On July 14th, the night crew consisted of 47 people, ranging from college students earning tuition money to career seasonal workers who followed the fishing industry up and down the coast. Among them was Caleb Dempsey, 34, a line supervisor from Tacoma, who had worked 7 consecutive seasons at Bristol Bay. His shift logs were meticulous. He noted equipment temperatures, processing rates, and crew rotations with the precision of someone who understood that small oversights could shut down an entire operation. His entry for July 14th started normally, equipment functioning properly, crew at full strength, production rate ahead of schedule. Then at 2:17 a.m., everything stopped. The first person to report what happened was Ingrid Hollis, 22, a college student from Fairbanks, working the flash freezing station. She left her position and walked directly to the shift manager's office, where she filed a formal incident report claiming she had experienced a vivid hallucination while on duty. Within 10 minutes, 3 more workers filed similar reports. Within 20 minutes, the number climbed to 12. By 3 a.m., 23 workers from different stations across the facility had documented the same experience. They all described it the same way. A sudden shift in perception, as if the cannery walls had become transparent. Beyond them, a landscape none of them recognized, but all of them somehow knew. Flat, tidal grounds stretching toward mountains they had never seen. Wooden fish traps constructed in patterns that predated modern fishing techniques. And figures, dozens of them wearing clothing, adorned with specific designs that several workers later sketched from memory. The designs matched traditional Yupik ceremonial dress, though most of the workers had no background in indigenous culture and had never seen such clothing before. The most disturbing detail appeared in every report. The figures weren't simply present in the vision, they were beckoning, gesturing toward a specific location that, when the workers returned to normal perception, corresponded to Section D storage in the facility's northwest corner. Section D had been sealed since 1989. Caleb Dempsey made the decision to temporarily halt operations and document everything. He separated the 23 workers who had filed reports and interviewed each one individually. Their accounts matched down to specific details. The angle of sunlight in the vision, though it was the middle of the night. The sound of water moving through wooden traps. The scent of wood smoke and something else, something ceremonial that none of them could quite identify. 3 workers mentioned the same song, hummed it identically when asked to reproduce it. None of them had heard it before that night. The shift manager, Wallace Drummond, 51, contacted facility administration at 4 a.m. By 6 a.m., the day shift arrived to find the night crew still being interviewed, production completely stopped, and management scrambling to determine whether they were dealing with mass hysteria, equipment malfunction, or something else entirely. The facility brought in a medical consultant from Anchorage who evaluated each of the 23 workers. All showed normal neurological function. None had been exposed to carbon monoxide or other airborne toxins. The facility's environmental systems checked out clean. Management issued a standard response: stress-induced mass suggestion, likely triggered by the isolated working conditions and long hours. The 23 workers were given the rest of the week off with full pay, while administration decided how to proceed. Most returned to the company housing units Dillingham maintained for seasonal staff. Several stayed with local families. 2 checked into the only motel in town. On the night of July 15th, 4 of them disappeared. The first indication came at 8 a.m. on July the 16th, when the day shift supervisor noticed that 2 workers hadn't reported for their scheduled return to duty. When contacted, their roommates in the company housing reported that Adrian Sloan, 27, and Morgan Kessler, 29, hadn't been in their bunks that morning. Security footage from the facility showed both of them entering the grounds at 2:43 a.m. They were accompanied by 2 other workers from the 23, Desmond Boyle, 31, and Simone Carlisle, 26. The footage showed them moving with purpose, not hesitation. They accessed Section D storage using an override code that shouldn't have worked. That storage area had been physically sealed after a minor structural issue in 1989. The door mechanism was deactivated, the space marked as off-limits in all facility documentation. Yet the footage showed the 4 workers standing before the sealed entrance for several minutes before the door simply opened. They went inside carrying specific items. Adrian and Morgan had taken coiled fishing nets from the main storage area. Desmond carried a container of sodium tripolyphosphate, a preservative used in the processing operation. Simone held what appeared to be equipment parts from the flash freezing station. Security footage showed them entering Section D at 2:51 a.m. The timestamp continued running. 2:52 a.m., 2:53 a.m. The door remained open, the interior dark. The 4 workers never emerged. When facility security forced entry to Section D at 11 a.m., they discovered something that made no sense. The storage room was empty. Not empty of people, but empty of everything. The space showed no signs of recent entry. No footprints in the dust that had accumulated over 21 years. No disturbance to the abandoned equipment that had been sealed inside. And no 4 workers who had entered 7 hours earlier. But the investigators found something else that stopped them cold. The interior dimensions of the room didn't match the exterior measurements of the building. From outside, Section D measured roughly 20 feet by 30 feet. From inside, the space extended at least 40 feet deep, possibly more. The back wall wasn't visible in the darkness, even with high-powered flashlights. Wallace Drummond immediately contacted state authorities. By evening on July 16th, Alaska state troopers had taken over the investigation, treating it as 4 missing persons cases. They brought in search teams, cadaver dogs, and structural engineers to make sense of the impossible geometry of Section D. The engineers confirmed what the initial investigators reported. The interior space exceeded the building's exterior footprint. When they attempted to measure the exact dimensions, their equipment began malfunctioning. GPS units showed locations that shifted by hundreds of feet. Laser measuring tools returned inconsistent readings. One engineer reported that the back wall of the room seemed to recede as he approached it. The following night, July 17th, 6 more workers disappeared using the same method. Security had been increased after the first disappearances. Additional cameras were installed. The entrance to Section D was physically barred and locked with industrial chains. Guards patrolled the facility perimeter. None of it mattered. At 2:44 a.m., 6 workers from the original 23 bypassed all security measures and entered Section D. The footage showed them approaching the chained entrance. The chains were intact in one frame. In the next frame, captured 1.3 seconds later, the chains hung open as if they had never been secured. The 6 workers entered carrying more items. Plastic containers filled with processed salmon, more preservative chemicals, lengths of stainless steel piping from the processing equipment. By morning, they were gone. Same pattern. No trace inside the storage room. No explanation for how they vanished from a sealed space under constant surveillance. This time, authorities sealed the entire facility and began investigating its history more thoroughly. What they discovered added layers to the mystery without providing any answers. The Bristol Bay Cannery had been built in 1952 on land purchased from a private seller. Before that, the land had been part of a larger tract owned by various fishing companies dating back to the early 1900s. But researchers digging through historical records found something odd. Indigenous oral histories collected by anthropologists in the 1930s, mention the specific location as a ceremonial site used by Yupik communities for pre-contact salmon blessing rituals. The site had been abandoned in the late 1800s for reasons the oral histories didn't specify. Elders interviewed in the 1930s refused to discuss it in detail, saying only that the location had been given to those who were called. On the night of July the 18th, the remaining 13 workers completed the pattern. Despite the facility being completely closed and the grounds surrounded by law enforcement, all 13 gained access. Security footage showed them arriving separately, approaching from different directions, some walking across sections of the building's exterior that should have been inaccessible. Each carried items: the last of the fishing nets, containers of various processing chemicals, personal belongings including notebooks, photographs, and in one case, an entire duffel bag of clothing. They entered Section D at exactly 2:47 a.m. This time, investigators were prepared. State troopers and FBI agents who had arrived that evening attempted to follow them inside. The agents reported that the moment they crossed the threshold, the space seemed to shift. The walls weren't walls, but boundaries between something they couldn't articulate. The darkness wasn't absence of light, but presence of something else. 3 agents reported feeling overwhelming compulsion to continue forward, toward whatever lay at the back of that impossible room. 2 of them did continue for several steps before being physically restrained and pulled back out. The 13 workers kept walking. The footage from cameras positioned inside Section D showed them moving deeper into the space, their forms becoming indistinct as they approached the back wall that measurements suggested shouldn't exist. At 2:51 a.m., all 13 figures simply faded from view, as if the darkness had absorbed them. Intensive searching found nothing. Cadaver dogs refused to enter Section D after the first attempt. 3 different dogs were brought to the entrance and each displayed the same behavior, backing away and whining. Thermal imaging showed no heat signatures inside the space, ground penetrating. Radar detected anomalies suggesting the foundation extended down more than 30 feet, though building records indicated a standard 8-foot foundation pour. The Bristol Bay Cannery was closed by federal order on July 20, 2010. The facility was sealed and placed under continuous surveillance. Federal investigators spent 3 months examining every detail of the 23 missing persons cases. They interviewed the remaining workers, analyzed the security footage frame by frame, and brought in experts from fields ranging from structural engineering to cultural anthropology to parapsychology. No explanation emerged that satisfied all the evidence. The most disturbing findings came from analysis of the items the workers had taken. The fishing nets, preservative chemicals, and equipment parts formed a pattern when listed in the order they were removed. Several researchers noted that the selection mirrored materials that would be needed for traditional salmon processing, but using modern industrial equivalents of ancient tools and methods. The nets matched configurations documented in pre-contact Yupik fishing practices. The sodium tripolyphosphate served the same preservation function as traditional smoking and drying techniques. Even the stainless steel piping, when arranged according to the sequence it was taken, formed shapes similar to traditional fish trap construction. It was as if the workers had been systematically gathering everything needed to recreate ancestral salmon processing methods using contemporary materials. In October 2010, the federal government quietly purchased the Bristol Bay Cannery through a subsidiary management company. The facility reopened under strict new protocols in June 2011. Section D remained permanently sealed, the entrance welded shut and covered with concrete. New workers were informed that certain areas of the building were off-limits due to structural concerns. The seasonal employment contract included unusual clauses preventing workers from accessing historical records about the facility or discussing any unusual experiences with media. The official conclusion listed all 23 workers as missing persons in cases that remain open but inactive. No bodies were ever recovered. No evidence of foul play was established. The families of the disappeared received death certificates after the standard 7-year waiting period in 2017. But the story didn't end with the disappearances. Current and former workers at the facility have reported persistent anomalies since operations resumed. Night shift employees occasionally hear music emanating from the sealed Section D area. Multiple workers have independently described the same melody, matching the song that 3 of the original 23 hummed during their interviews in July 2010. Security cameras positioned near the sealed entrance sometimes capture audio signatures that analysis suggests are human voices, though the words aren't in English or any language that linguistic experts have identified. More troubling are the reports that surface every few years of workers experiencing visions similar to those described on July 14, 2010. The facility has learned to watch for specific signs. Workers who become fixated on Section D during their shifts. Employees who begin asking questions about the building's history or indigenous land use. Anyone who reports seeing figures in traditional dress reflected in the facility's stainless steel equipment. When these signs appear, management implements immediate intervention protocols. The affected workers are quietly reassigned to day shifts, moved to different areas of the facility, and monitored closely until the season ends. In several documented cases, workers have been sent home early with full pay and discouraged from returning in subsequent seasons. The facility maintains a confidential list of employees flagged for these behaviors. The list currently contains 37 names spanning the years since reopening. None of those 37 workers have disappeared, but facility management doesn't consider that a success. They consider it postponement of something inevitable, something they don't understand but can't prevent. The protocols exist, not to solve the mystery, but to manage it, to keep it contained for as long as possible. In Dillingham, locals don't discuss the Bristol Bay incident openly, but everyone knows the basic story. Some families still wait for missing relatives to return. Others have accepted that the salmon run claimed 23 people in a way that has no precedent and no explanation. The Yupik elders who were consulted during the investigation offered little clarity, saying only that certain places remember their purpose and sometimes call those who will listen. The families of the disappeared eventually erected a memorial on the outskirts of Dillingham. 23 names carved into black granite, accompanied by a dedication that reads, "They answered a call we could not hear. May they find peace in the place they sought." Below the names is a simple image, a traditional fish trap pattern that matches the designs several workers sketched from their shared vision. Every summer during peak salmon season, someone leaves offerings at the memorial. Fresh-caught salmon, carefully prepared. Bundles of dried herbs. small carved figures depicting traditional fishing scenes. No one has ever witnessed who leaves these offerings. They simply appear overnight, always between July 14th and July 18th, always arranged in patterns that suggest ceremony rather than casual tribute. The Bristol Bay Cannery continues operating. Every summer, new workers arrive seeking employment in one of Alaska's most profitable industries. Most complete their contracts and leave without incident. But the facility maintains its protocols, watches for warning signs, and keeps Section D permanently sealed behind concrete and steel. Because something inside that impossible space is still there, still waiting, and occasionally still calling. On December 14th, 2015, at 9:47 a.m. Alaska Standard Time, a Cessna 206 departed Talkeetna Airport, bound for a mining camp 110 miles northwest of Denali. The pilot filed a standard VFR flight plan. Estimated flight time, 68 minutes. The aircraft carried mining equipment, medical supplies, and mail for 14 workers spending their winter rotation in one of Alaska's most isolated operations. By 10:03 a.m., the plane had vanished. What happened next would become one of the most documented yet least explained incidents in Alaska aviation history. The official record lists it as pilot error and catastrophic mechanical failure. The families know otherwise. So do the search crews who found what remained. This is the story of that flight, the impossible distress call that arrived 4 hours too late, and the questions that still echo across the Alaska range. His name was Graham Brennan, 47 years old, married, father of 2. 20 years, flying bush routes across Alaska's interior. Over 12,000 logged flight hours, no incidents, no violations. The kind of pilot who checked weather 3 times before filing a flight plan and carried survival gear even on short hops. His wife Colleen said he treated every flight like it could be his last. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the wilderness that stretched in every direction beyond the propeller's arc. December in Alaska means 4.5 hours of daylight. Brennan's departure put him in the air during the narrow window of usable light, with arrival scheduled before the early afternoon darkness settled over the mining camp. The weather forecast was clear. Light winds, visibility 10 miles, cloud ceiling at 8,000 feet. Cold but manageable at 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Brennan had flown this exact route 43 times in the previous 2 years. He knew every ridge, every valley, every emergency landing site between Talkeetna and the camp. The Cessna 206 he piloted that morning was a workhorse aircraft, registration number N2.7BK, maintained meticulously by Talkeetna Air Services. The pre-flight inspection logged by Brennan himself showed all systems nominal. Dual VHF radios, GPS navigation with moving map display, emergency locator transmitter, satellite phone. The aircraft had undergone its 100-hour inspection just 9 days earlier. Every component certified airworthy. At 9:52 a.m., Brennan made his first and only standard position report to Anchorage Center. His transmission was clear, professional, routine. He reported passing over the Chulitna River at 6,500 feet, on course, on schedule. His voice carried no stress, no concern. Air traffic control acknowledged. Brennan rogered the acknowledgement. Standard procedure, standard day. 3 minutes later, at 9:55 a.m., his radar transponder signal disappeared from Anchorage Center screens. Controllers attempted to raise Brennan on both primary and backup frequencies. No response. They tried his satellite phone. The call connected but went unanswered. At 10:04 a.m., 9 minutes after losing contact, Anchorage Center initiated emergency procedures and contacted the Alaska Air National Guard's Rescue Coordination Center. By 10:30 a.m., search operations had mobilized. 2 HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters lifted off from Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. The Alaska State Troopers dispatched ground teams to Talkeetna to coordinate with local pilots familiar with the terrain. Civil Air Patrol volunteers began organizing aerial search grids. The mining camp radioed that Brennan had not arrived and confirmed they had no visual or radio contact. The search area covered Brennan's filed flight path and extended 30 miles on either side, accounting for possible navigation errors or forced landings due to mechanical issues. Helicopters equipped with FLIR thermal imaging swept the valleys and ridges. Fixed-wing aircraft crisscrossed at higher altitudes. Ground teams on snowmobiles checked accessible areas along frozen rivers and lake systems. The weather held clear. Visibility remained excellent. They found nothing. No debris, no impact crater, no ELT signal despite the aircraft being equipped with a 406 MHz emergency locator that should activate automatically upon impact with a force of 5 Gs or greater. The wilderness below revealed none of its secrets. 12 hours of coordinated searching produced exactly 0 evidence that Graham Brennan's Cessna had ever entered the search area. At 1:51 p.m., 4 hours and 6 minutes after Brennan's last confirmed position report, something impossible happened. A faint distress transmission was received by a commercial airliner cruising at 35,000 feet, approximately 240 miles east-northeast of Anchorage. The pilot, Captain Russell Gaines of Alaska Airlines Flight 66, reported hearing a weak, broken transmission on the emergency frequency 121.5 MHz. The transmission lasted approximately 8 seconds. It consisted of a partial aircraft identification and what sounded like distress phraseology. The transmission was scratchy, distorted, and contained significant background interference that Gaines described as similar to radio static, but with an irregular pulsing quality. Gaines immediately relayed the information to Anchorage Center. The coordinates of his aircraft at the time of reception placed the signal source somewhere in a massive expanse of wilderness, northeast of the original search area. But this presented an immediate and devastating problem. For Brennan's aircraft to reach that location, he would have had to fly in precisely the opposite direction of his filed flight plan for over an hour, navigating through terrain he had no reason to enter, burning fuel for a destination that made no logical sense. Search operations pivoted to the new area. The Alaska Air National Guard deployed resources to the coordinates provided by Flight 66. By nightfall, with darkness forcing the suspension of aerial operations, ground teams were staging for a dawn assault on one of the most remote and inaccessible regions of Alaska's interior. The area was a labyrinth of steep valleys, frozen rivers, and dense stands of black spruce. No mining operations, no settlements, no reason for any aircraft to be there. The next morning, December 15th, search crews made their first discovery. At 8:23 a.m., a National Guard helicopter crew spotted wreckage in a narrow valley approximately 8 miles from the coordinates derived from the distress transmission. The debris field was scattered across roughly 300 yards of terrain but showed no impact crater, no trench, no evidence of a high-speed collision with the ground. Pieces of the Cessna were distributed in a pattern that didn't match any known crash dynamics. The tail section lay intact near the northern end of the field. Wing fragments were separated by significant distances. The engine, still attached to the firewall, sat upright on the snow as if placed there deliberately. More disturbing was the condition of the wreckage itself. Many pieces showed no fire damage, despite aviation fuel typically igniting upon impact. Aluminum sections were torn but not crushed. The propeller blades were unbent. Investigators would later describe it as though the aircraft had been disassembled in flight, and the components scattered by unknown forces rather than destroyed by collision. Graham Brennan's body was never found. His survival gear was gone. His emergency kit was gone. The satellite phone was recovered, but its internal memory had been corrupted beyond recovery. The GPS unit was found, but its stored waypoints and flight track data were completely erased, something that should be impossible without deliberate action or catastrophic electrical failure. Yet other electrical components showed no signs of failure or fire damage. The cargo was present and largely intact. Mining equipment secured in the cargo area remained strapped down. Mail bags showed minimal damage. The medical supplies were scattered but identifiable. It was as though the aircraft had come apart around the cargo without affecting it. On December 18th, investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, though the Cessna 206 was not required to carry either. Brennan had installed them voluntarily as part of his professional approach to safety. The devices were damaged but functional. Data recovery specialists from the National Transportation Safety Board brought the units to Anchorage for analysis. What they found on those recordings would classify the investigation as anomalous and effectively end the public inquiry. The flight data recorder showed normal parameters through Brennan's last position report at 9:52 a.m. Then, for 3 minutes, the data became erratic. Altitude readings fluctuated between 6,500 feet and 14,000 feet, despite the aircraft's maximum service ceiling being 15,700 feet and the impossibility of gaining 7,500 feet in 3 minutes. Airspeed. Indicators showed the aircraft simultaneously traveling at 120 knots and 0 knots. Heading information spun through all 360 degrees of the compass repeatedly. At 9:55 a.m., all data ceased. The cockpit voice recorder was more disturbing. Brennan's voice is heard conducting normal cockpit operations through 9:52 a.m. At 9:53 a.m., he can be heard saying something under his breath that audio enhancement rendered as, "What is that?" His tone is curious, not alarmed. 15 seconds later, a sound enters the recording. Investigators described it as similar to radio interference but with tonal qualities that suggested structure rather than randomness. The sound builds in intensity over the next 90 seconds. At 9:54 a.m. and 32 seconds, Brennan speaks again. His voice is tense. "Not possible. That's not... How is that?" The sentence trails off. The interference sound grows louder. Brennan keys his radio microphone. The transmission is never heard by air traffic control because it doesn't go out on the assigned frequency. Instead, it seems to loop back into the cockpit, creating a feedback effect. At 9:55 a.m., Brennan says one word, "No." Then the recording captures something that makes no technical sense. Multiple voices appear on the audio track, not from the radio, not from external sources. They emerge from within the cockpit itself. Audio forensics determined the voices were not radio transmissions, not interference patterns, not artifacts of the recording equipment. They were present in the physical space of the cockpit. The voices speak in overlapping patterns. Some of the words are recognizable as standard aviation phraseology: headings, altitudes, coordinates. But the coordinates don't match Brennan's flight plan or his last known position. They describe locations scattered across hundreds of miles of Alaska wilderness. Some coordinates place aircraft positions inside mountains. Some describe altitudes below sea level. The voices continue for 28 seconds, then silence. The recorder continues running but captures nothing. No engine noise, no wind, no sounds of impact, just silence. At 1:51 p.m., 4 hours and 56 minutes later, the recorder suddenly activates again for 8 seconds. Brennan's voice speaks clearly. N247BK, declaring emergency. Unknown position. Systems failure. Need immediate assistance. In the background, the same interference-like sound pulses rhythmically. Then the recording ends permanently. This was the transmission received by Alaska Airlines Flight 66. But Brennan's aircraft had already been destroyed by that point. The wreckage distribution and environmental factors allowed investigators to determine the aircraft had been on the ground for several hours when that distress call was recorded and transmitted. No one could explain how the recorder continued to function. No one could explain how the transmission reached an aircraft 240 miles away with only the power of a handheld radio. The National Transportation Safety Board issued its final report on August 3, 2016. Probable cause: pilot error leading to spatial disorientation and controlled flight into terrain. Contributing factors: possible undocumented mechanical failure. The report acknowledged the anomalies, but attributed them to recorder malfunction and environmental conditions affecting electronic equipment. The strange audio recordings were noted but not analyzed in detail. The impossible position of the distress call was listed as likely due to signal propagation effects common in Arctic environments. Colleen Brennan rejected the findings. So did every pilot who knew Graham. The man who flew 12,000 hours without incident didn't suddenly lose the ability to read instruments and fly straight. The man who checked weather 3 times didn't blunder into terrain in clear conditions. Something else happened in that narrow window between 9:52 and 9:55 a.m. Something that scattered his aircraft across 8 miles of wilderness without leaving an impact signature. Something that recorded his voice 4 hours after the crash from components that should have been dead. In the months following the incident, other pilots flying in the region reported unusual radio interference on the same frequencies used by Brennan. 3 separate crews documented unexplained navigation anomalies, where GPS systems briefly showed their aircraft in locations dozens of miles from their actual positions. One pilot reported hearing voices on the emergency frequency speaking coordinates that placed his aircraft inside a mountain he was actively flying over. All incidents were brief. All were dismissed as equipment glitches or atmospheric effects. The Alaska State Troopers closed the case in February 2017. Graham Brennan was declared legally dead. His family held a memorial service at Talkeetna's small community church. His name was added to the Alaska Airmen's Association Memorial for pilots lost in service. The Cessna 206 wreckage was transported to Anchorage and stored in a National Guard facility. Official records list the incident as resolved. But some questions remain. What did Brennan see at 9:53 a.m. that made him question the possible? Why did his aircraft's electronics record impossible flight parameters before failing completely? How did components scattered across a frozen valley transmit a coherent distress call hours after impact? And where's Graham Brennan? Local pilots don't fly that corridor anymore. There are other routes. safer routes. The mining camp that was Brennan's destination closed in 2018, the last workers airlifted out by helicopters that carefully avoided the valley where N247BK was found. The coordinates from the cockpit recording are noted in unofficial aviation forums. Some pilots have tried to match them to real locations. The patterns suggest movement, but not movement possible for any aircraft. They describe a flight path through space that doesn't align with the physical landscape. Colleen Brennan still lives in Talkeetna. She gives interviews sparingly. She says the hardest part isn't the loss, though that weight never lifts. The hardest part is the not knowing. The official explanation feels like closure, forced onto a wound that won't seal. She keeps her husband's logbooks, every flight recorded in his careful handwriting. Departure times, arrival times, weather conditions, passenger counts. 20 years of routine transformed into legacy by 4 minutes of the impossible. The Alaska Range keeps its secrets, thousands of square miles of wilderness where even search crews with modern technology can vanish for days. But this wasn't a case of the wilderness winning. This was something else. Something that plucked a veteran pilot from clear skies and scattered the pieces of his aircraft like puzzle fragments across a landscape he had no reason to enter. The voices on that recording were never identified. Audio analysis determined they weren't Graham Brennan. They weren't anyone on file with the FAA or any aviation authority. They spoke coordinates and headings with mechanical precision but wrong information. Information that, if followed, would have directed aircraft into terrain or impossible positions. Some researchers have speculated the voices represent previous pilots lost in similar circumstances. Their final transmissions somehow captured and replayed. But no matching voice prints exist. No similar speech patterns have been found. On quiet winter mornings in Talkeetna, when the Alaska Range stands sharp against the southern horizon and the air is cold enough to freeze breath before it fades, some pilots claim they can hear it on the emergency frequency. A faint, rhythmic pulsing. Not quite static, not quite speech. Just a reminder that some disappearances don't offer the dignity of explanation. Some vanishings resist every attempt at rational understanding. And some places in Alaska don't just claim lives. They rewrite the last moments into questions that echo longer than any answer ever could. In the autumn of 2005, a 52-year-old subsistence logger named Robert McKenzie maintained a remote claim 70 miles northeast of Nome, Alaska, working timber rights on federal land where the nearest road ended 40 miles back. And cell service was a concept that belonged to another world entirely. Mackenzie lived alone in a prefabricated cabin he'd hauled in piece by piece over 2 seasons, operating on a quarterly resupply schedule that dropped provisions via bush plane every 90 days. He was experienced, methodical, and entirely comfortable with isolation. He'd been working the claim for 8 years without incident. On September 23, 2005, pilot Arnold Sutherland flew his scheduled supply run to Mackenzie's coordinates and found the cabin empty. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside, everything appeared orderly. A half-finished meal sat on the table, covered but not yet spoiled. Mackenzie's winter gear hung on its usual peg. His radio sat on the shelf, powered off. The bed was made. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of hurried departure, no note explaining an unplanned absence. Sutherland circled the area twice. Saw no smoke from a campfire, saw no figure moving through the sparse birch and spruce surrounding the claim. He landed anyway and spent 30 minutes calling Mackenzie's name into the surrounding wilderness. The silence was absolute. He filed a missing person report when he returned to Nome that evening. The Alaska State Troopers dispatched a search team 48 hours later. Trooper Glenn Fortner led a 6-person unit equipped for a week-long grid search. They documented the cabin's condition with photographs and detailed inventory. Mackenzie's logging equipment sat exactly where it should be. His axe hung on the wall. His chainsaw rested in its case, chain recently sharpened and oiled. The fuel cans were 3/4 full. His truck, a 1987 Ford with 240,000 miles, sat 20 yards from the cabin with keys in the ignition. What stopped them cold was the lack of tracks. The ground around the cabin held no boot prints leading away into the forest. The logging trails Mackenzie used showed no fresh disturbance. Search dogs brought from Anchorage showed interest in Mackenzie's scent inside the cabin but refused to follow any trail beyond its immediate perimeter. They circled the structure repeatedly, whining, but would not commit to a direction. Fortner expanded the search radius to 5 miles. Helicopters swept the region with thermal imaging. Volunteers from Nome and surrounding communities combed the area on foot. They found nothing. No campsite, no body, no torn clothing snagged on branches, no evidence Mackenzie had walked into the wilderness at all. After 2 weeks, the official search was suspended. The case went into the files as an unexplained disappearance, attributed officially to the countless ways a person could vanish in Alaska's interior. Mackenzie's claim reverted to federal oversight. The cabin was secured and eventually absorbed into general land management protocols. Over the following months, Mackenzie's family held memorial services and began the slow process of accepting loss without closure. His case joined dozens of others in Alaska's registry of people who simply walked into the wilderness and never returned. 3 years passed. In June 2008, a construction crew working a highway expansion project 40 miles southwest of Mackenzie's original claim encountered a man walking out of the forest in broad daylight. Foreman Gary Dunsworth spotted him first, emerging from the tree line at approximately 2 p.m. on a clear afternoon. The man was disoriented but ambulatory, wearing a flannel jacket and work boots that appeared relatively clean despite the muddy terrain. He approached the construction site slowly, raising one hand in a hesitant greeting. Dunsworth called out, asking if the man needed help. The stranger stopped 10 yards away, looking confused. He said his name was Robert Mackenzie, and he was trying to find his way back to his logging claim. He asked if Dunsworth knew the way. Dunsworth recognized the name immediately. Everyone in the region knew about Robert Mackenzie. The disappearance had been front-page news in Nome for weeks back in 2005. Dunsworth radioed for emergency services and approached cautiously, keeping his voice calm and steady. Mackenzie seemed lucid but deeply confused. When Dunsworth told him the date, Mackenzie insisted it was impossible. He said he'd been gone only a few days, maybe a week at most. He'd lost track, he admitted, but not 3 years. That couldn't be right. Paramedics arrived within 40 minutes. They found Mackenzie in remarkable physical condition for someone allegedly exposed to wilderness conditions for 36 months. His weight appeared normal. His skin showed no signs of prolonged malnutrition or frostbite scarring. His teeth were intact. He had no infected wounds, no parasitic infections, no symptoms of hypothermia damage. His clothing, while worn, showed no significant deterioration beyond what might be expected from several weeks of outdoor exposure, not years. At the hospital in Nome, physicians conducted a comprehensive examination. Dr. Lynn Chambers documented the results with growing bewilderment. Mackenzie's blood work showed no vitamin deficiencies. His muscle mass was consistent with someone who'd maintained regular physical activity and adequate nutrition. His hair and nails had grown, but only by amounts suggesting weeks of time, not years. There were no pressure sores, no signs of extended immobility. His dental exam revealed no new decay. His vision prescription, last updated in 2004, remained accurate. Most disturbing was the lack of psychological symptoms expected from prolonged isolation. Mackenzie showed no signs of severe dissociation, no panic responses, no cognitive deterioration typical of extreme stress. He was confused, certainly, but his confusion centered entirely on the discrepancy between his perceived time missing and the actual calendar date. When shown newspapers, television broadcasts, and documentation proving 3 years had passed, his distress intensified, but his mind did not fracture. He simply could not reconcile the information with his memory. Under careful interview conditions, Mackenzie attempted to describe his experience. His account was fragmented and contradictory. He remembered leaving his cabin to check a far logging site, something he'd done countless times before. He remembered the walk taking longer than expected. He remembered familiar landmarks appearing in sequences that made no geographic sense, as if the forest had rearranged itself. He described days that felt circular, where he would walk from dawn to dusk and somehow end up back at a starting point he'd left hours earlier. He mentioned the sun behaving strangely, rising and setting at angles that violated his understanding of seasonal patterns. Most unsettling were his references to being observed. He never saw anyone. He never heard voices or footsteps. But he felt with absolute certainty that something ancient and patient was watching him and move through spaces that followed rules he couldn't comprehend. He described the sensation as being studied, the way a researcher might observe an insect in a controlled environment, noting its reactions without interference. As the days passed and Mackenzie became increasingly aware of the temporal discrepancy, his mental state deteriorated rapidly. He developed acute anxiety followed by periods of catatonia. He would sit for hours staring at clocks, watching seconds tick by, as if trying to reorient himself to normal time flow. Dr. Chambers recommended psychiatric evaluation. Mackenzie was transferred to a facility in Anchorage specializing in trauma cases. The official explanation, delivered quietly to Mackenzie's family and logged in medical records, suggested a severe dissociative fugue state, possibly triggered by environmental factors. The theory proposed Mackenzie had wandered in a cognitive fog, survived through some combination of luck and instinct, and his mind had distorted time perception as a protective mechanism. It was a tidy explanation that satisfied bureaucratic requirements. It satisfied no one who'd actually examined Mackenzie or reviewed the evidence. Alaska State Trooper Glenn Fortner, who'd led the original search, requested permission to return to Mackenzie's claim. Permission was granted. In August 2008, Fortner and a small team hiked back to the cabin site. They found everything exactly as they'd left it 3 years earlier. The cabin was undisturbed. The logging equipment remained in place. but Fortner noted anomalies in the surrounding area that hadn't been documented during the initial search. Compass readings fluctuated wildly within a quarter-mile radius of the cabin. Multiple compasses gave contradictory directions for magnetic north with variations of up 40 degrees. GPS units struggled to maintain satellite locks, frequently displaying error messages or positions that shifted hundreds of yards while the device remained stationary. Watches worn by team members ran inconsistently. One digital watch gained 17 minutes over a 6-hour period. An analog watch lost 32 minutes during the same span. A third watch stopped entirely, then resumed normal function once the team moved beyond the claim boundaries. Fortner documented everything, but was instructed to include the findings as minor technical anomalies in his report, attributed to unusual magnetic deposits in the area. The claim was officially reclassified under environmental protection mandates and designated off-limits for commercial activity. No further investigation was authorized. Robert Mackenzie remained institutionalized for 7 months. His condition stabilized but never fully recovered. He was eventually released into his family's care with ongoing psychiatric support. He never returned to logging. He avoided wilderness areas entirely. In rare interviews with family members, he maintained his account hadn't changed. Days had passed for him, not years. Something in those woods operated under different rules, and he'd been caught in its effect. In subsequent years, other individuals working in the broader Seward Peninsula region reported similar, though less severe, experiences. Equipment malfunctions concentrated in specific geographic zones. Time perception inconsistencies during extended wilderness operations. The sensation of being observed in empty forests. These reports were logged but never investigated as connected phenomena. The logging claim itself remains off-limits. Federal land management maintains the environmental protection designation, citing sensitive ecosystem preservation. The cabin still stands, slowly weathering in the Arctic climate, a fixed point in a landscape where time itself seems negotiable. Robert Mackenzie died in 2019 at the age of 66 from unrelated causes. His obituary made no mention of his disappearance or the circumstances of his return. His family, respecting his wishes, kept those details private. But those who knew the case remember the central impossibility that was never resolved. A man walked into the forest and vanished for 3 years. When he returned, only days had passed for him. His body showed no signs of the time that had elapsed. Medical science found no explanation. The wilderness offered no answers. Some places, it seems, exist outside the reliable flow of hours and days we take for granted. Some spaces in the deep woods operate on their own schedule, indifferent to the clocks we carry. And sometimes, rarely, someone crosses the threshold between our time and whatever other rhythm governs those hidden territories. Whether Robert Mackenzie was fortunate to return at all, or whether his return was the cruelest part of his experience watching the world age while he remained unchanged, is a question with no comfortable answer. The forest keeps its own time, and it does not explain itself to us. On the morning of November 14, 2019, a commercial fisherman named Garrett Lundgren pulled his nets from the frigid waters of Clarence Strait, 30 miles south of Ketchikan, Alaska, and discovered something that would end his career and shatter his understanding of the quiet waters he'd worked for 17 years. It wasn't the fish that stopped him cold. Garrett Lundgren was 41 years old, a third-generation Alaskan fisherman who'd inherited his father's boat and his grandfather's knowledge of the strait's currents and channels. He was meticulous, technical, the kind of man who'd upgraded his traditional net systems with GPS mapping software that tracked every deployment with mathematical precision. His operation was small but efficient, working the deep channels where the water ran cold and black, where halibut and salmon followed predictable routes through underwater canyons that plunged hundreds of feet beneath the surface. That November morning, the weather was clear, the sea calm, and Garrett's nets came up heavy in a way that felt wrong. The resistance wasn't the familiar weight of a good catch. It was uneven, dragging, like he'd snagged something on the bottom. When the nets finally broke the surface, streaming seawater and kelp, Garrett saw the bones. Human bones, tangled in the mesh. A partial rib cage, what looked like a femur, shreds of decomposed fabric that might have once been clothing. A single waterlogged boot, its sole still intact. Garrett cut his engines and stared at the net for a long time before he reached for his radio. The Coast Guard arrived within 2 hours. Alaska state troopers followed. By afternoon, Garrett's boat was surrounded by official vessels, and investigators were documenting the remains with cameras and evidence bags, while Garrett sat in his cabin, hands shaking as he drank coffee that had gone cold. The initial assumption was straightforward. A drowning victim? Possibly a fisherman who'd gone overboard, whose body had drifted into the deep channel where currents and cold water had preserved partial remains. Tragic, but not unprecedented in Alaskan waters where maritime accidents claimed lives with grim regularity. Garrett was questioned, his logs examined, his GPS data reviewed. Everything checked out. He was cleared to continue his operations while forensic teams worked to identify the remains. The investigators thanked him for his cooperation and told him to report anything else unusual. 3 days later, Garrett's nets caught more bones. Different location in the strait, roughly 2 miles from the first discovery, but the same depth range, the same dark channels. This time, it was more complete. A skull, vertebrae, more fabric, and something else that made the forensic team go quiet when they examined it. A driver's license protected in a waterproof case, still legible despite years underwater. The name on the license was Melody Faulkner, a 34-year-old woman from Juneau who disappeared in 2004 while on a solo kayaking trip. She'd been presumed drowned. Her kayak found capsized near Douglas Island. Her body never recovered. The official conclusion had been accidental death by drowning. Case closed. Except Melody Faulkner's remains were found 50 miles from where she'd supposedly drowned, in a part of the strait she had no reason to visit. Garrett Lundgren went back out a week later after the troopers told him he was free to resume fishing. He didn't want to. His wife Annie begged him to find other work, to lease his permits, to do anything except go back to those channels. But fishing was all Garrett knew, and the bills didn't stop coming just because you'd pulled bones from the sea. On November 28, 2019, his nets caught remains for the 3rd time, then the 4th, then the 5th. Each discovery came from a different precise coordinate in the strait, yet all fell within a specific depth range between 380 and 420 feet. Each time there were bones, personal effects, fragments of lives that had ended in the water, and each time Garrett's GPS system logged the exact location with coordinates accurate to within 3 feet. It was Garrett himself who first noticed the pattern. Late one night, unable to sleep, he sat in his home office and plotted all the discovery points on a navigation chart. He used colored pins for each find, drawing lines between them, measuring distances with his dividers. The points formed concentric circles, perfect circles, mathematically precise, centered on a specific coordinate in the deepest part of the channel. The spacing between discoveries wasn't random. It was measured, deliberate, following a geometric progression that made Garrett's hands go numb as he stared at the pattern. He brought his findings to the Alaska State Troopers the next morning. By afternoon, the FBI had arrived in Ketchikan. What followed was a month of intensive investigation that residents of Ketchikan still don't talk about openly. Garrett's GPS data was seized. His boat was impounded for examination. Underwater ROV surveys were conducted at the coordinates, equipped with sonar mapping and high-resolution cameras capable of penetrating the darkness at 400 feet. The footage, according to the 2 investigators who viewed it before the case was federally classified, showed something that contradicted every natural explanation for how bodies accumulate in deep water. On the sea floor, in the silt and rock of the channel bottom, there were more remains. Many more, arranged in layers positioned with purpose, surrounded by markers made from bone and local stone arranged in geometric patterns. The ROVs documented what appeared to be a deliberate arrangement spanning an area roughly 200 feet in diameter. Concentric rings of human remains, some skeletal, some still partially preserved by the cold water and depth pressure, positioned with the kind of precision that suggested human intervention rather than natural accumulation. Forensic analysis revealed the scope. The remains represented at least 23 individuals, possibly more. Preliminary identification matched several to missing persons cases spanning 3 decades. A fishing boat captain who'd disappeared in 1987, a tourist from Seattle who'd vanished during a cruise stop in 1993, a local teenager who'd gone missing in 2001, others with varying stories but all sharing the same official conclusions. Presumed accidental drowning, body not recovered, case eventually closed. What disturbed the investigators wasn't just the number of victims or the time span. It was the evidence of movement. Many of the identified individuals had disappeared from locations far from Clarence Strait, some from different islands, some from different waterways entirely. Yet they'd ended up here, in this specific deep channel arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement over years, possibly decades. The personal effects were cataloged. Wallets, jewelry, shoes, clothing items, even a child's backpack that matched a missing persons case from 1995. Some items showed signs of having been on the ocean floor for years. Others appeared relatively recent, their materials less degraded, their positions in the outer rings of the geometric pattern suggesting they'd been added more recently to the arrangement. The most disturbing detail came from the bone markers, structures made from human skeletal remains arranged vertically in the silt like fence posts or boundary markers, creating divisions between the rings. Analysis showed the markers incorporated bones from multiple individuals, assembled with what forensic anthropologists described as deliberate craftsmanship, using knowledge of bone structure to create stable formations that could withstand current and pressure. Garrett Lundgren was interviewed 17 times in December 2019. His boat was dismantled and examined. His financial records were scrutinized. His background was investigated with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for terrorism suspects. Investigators found nothing that connected him to the discoveries beyond being the person whose nets had made them visible. But theories emerged. Law enforcement considered multiple scenarios: a maritime serial killer operating over decades, possibly someone with deep knowledge of currents and diving capabilities, a dumping ground used by multiple perpetrators, perhaps connected to organized crime, some kind of ritualistic practice involving the deliberate positioning of bodies in geometric patterns for unknown purposes. The problem was evidence. Despite the underwater documentation, despite the forensic analysis, there was no clear perpetrator, no obvious connection between victims beyond their shared fate in the deep channel. The geometric arrangement suggested intention, but intention without a clear motive or identifiable actor. On January 7, 2020, the FBI closed the investigation. The official statement attributed the discoveries to a tragic accumulation of drowning victims whose remains were naturally deposited in a deep channel area due to consistent current patterns and seafloor topology. The geometric arrangement was explained as a result of natural sedimentation processes and optical pattern recognition bias in survey methodology. Garrett Lundgren's commercial fishing permits were permanently revoked 2 weeks later, citing conflict of interest concerns and ongoing administrative review. No charges were filed. No explanation was provided beyond bureaucratic language about regulatory compliance. Garrett and Annie left Ketchikan in March 2020. They sold the boat at a loss, sold their house for below market value, and moved to Montana, where Garrett found work as an equipment mechanic, as far from the ocean as the continental United States allows. In the years since, officials have refused to discuss the Clarence Strait discoveries. The underwater survey footage remains classified. Families of identified victims were given brief, unsatisfying notifications that remains had been recovered and would be returned for burial, but no details about circumstances or location were provided. Ketchikan's commercial fishing community doesn't work the deep channels of Clarence Strait anymore. The routes are avoided without official restriction or published warnings, simply through collective silent agreement passed between fishing captains and their crews. When pressed about why certain productive fishing grounds go untouched, the usual response is vague mentions of difficult currents or poor catches, never the real reason that everyone knows, but nobody wants to say out loud. Garrett Lundgren has never returned to Alaska. He doesn't own a boat. He doesn't fish. In the single interview he gave to a local Montana newspaper in 2022 when asked about his former career, he said only that some waters run deeper than anyone wants to know, and some questions are better left at the bottom where they belong. The concentric circles remain undisturbed beneath 400 feet of black water, geometric and precise, marking something that neither accidents nor nature can adequately explain. 23 identified victims, possibly more still hidden in the silt, arranged over decades, by hands unknown, for purposes that remain as dark and cold as the channel itself. In Ketchikan, when tourists ask local guides about good fishing spots in Clarence Strait, they're given recommendations that carefully route around a specific set of coordinates, never explained, never acknowledged. The water there looks like any other patch of sea, dark, quiet, unremarkable from the surface. But Garrett Lundgren's GPS data still exists somewhere in federal archives, coordinates marking discoveries that ended careers and closed cases without closing questions. Perfect circles on a navigation chart, mathematical and deliberate, drawn in bones on the ocean floor, suggesting that whatever arranged them understood geometry, understood patience, and understood the cold, dark places where the drowned are supposed to simply drift and decay and disappear. Instead, they were gathered, positioned, marked, and in the spaces between official explanations and natural possibilities, in the gap between what was found and what was explained, remains the simple, uncomfortable truth that sometimes the ocean gives back what it takes, arranged in patterns that neither currents nor chance could create. The nets don't go down in those channels anymore. The fish still run, the tides still pull, the water still flows dark and cold through passages where the bottom drops away into depths that swallow light and sound and questions. And Garrett Lundgren, in Montana, far from any coastline, still wakes some nights from dreams of nets coming up heavy, of patterns emerging from darkness, of geometric shapes drawn in bone beneath water that keeps its secrets even when forced to surrender its dead. In the winter months of late 2006, something began appearing in the darkness along the frozen shores of Barrow, Alaska. Figures dressed in traditional Inupiat clothing, moving across the ice with impossible grace. Their footsteps leaving no mark in the snow. By the time federal authorities sealed the investigation in early 2008, 3 residents would be dead or vanished. A dozen more would require psychiatric intervention, and an entire community would be bound by confidentiality agreements that remain in force to this day. What happened in those 2 years defies conventional explanation, and the silence that followed suggests something far more disturbing than any official report would ever acknowledge. Barrow sits at the northernmost point of the United States, a community of roughly 4,000 residents perched on the edge of the Arctic Ocean. During the polar night, which stretches from mid-November through late January, the sun never rises above the horizon. It's a place where tradition and modernity coexist uneasily, where whaling crews still follow ancient practices, while satellite internet connects homes to the outside world. The isolation is profound, the landscape unforgiving, and the connection to ancestral heritage runs deeper than most outsiders can comprehend. The first documented encounter occurred on November 14, 2006, when a maintenance worker named Warren Tully reported seeing a figure near the Point Barrow Heritage Center at approximately 2 a.m. Tully had been conducting routine inspections of heating systems when his flashlight caught movement near the bluff overlooking the ocean. The figure, he later told investigators, was dressed in a traditional gut-skin parka and boots that appeared hand-sewn in a style no longer commonly worn. What stopped him cold wasn't the clothing itself, but the way the figure moved, gliding across ice that should have been treacherous, never slipping, never hesitating, moving with a purposefulness that seemed almost ceremonial. Tully called out. The figure didn't respond, but turned to look directly at him. He described the face as simultaneously familiar and impossible to place, weathered by decades of Arctic wind, yet somehow ageless. The figure raised one hand, palm outward, then turned and walked into the darkness beyond his flashlight's reach. When Tully followed, tracking what should have been a simple path across open ice, he found nothing. No footprints, no disturbance in the snow, no indication anyone had been there at all. He filed a report with the North Slope Borough Police, more out of protocol than expectation of action. The officer who took his statement, a sergeant named Brent Callahan, noted the details, but marked it as a possible wildlife sighting or equipment-related hallucination brought on by the polar night's psychological effects. The report was filed and forgotten until 3 days later, when it happened again. On November 17th, a woman named Colleen Kagak was walking home from her evening shift at the hospital when she saw not one but 3 figures standing near the old whaling station at the edge of town. She knew immediately they weren't living residents. The clothing was ceremonial, archival, the kind preserved in museum displays or old photographs. But more than that, she recognized one of them. The tallest figure, standing in the center with a whalebone staff in hand, bore an unmistakable resemblance to her great-grandfather, a renowned whaling captain who had died in 1958. Kagak, a registered nurse with 22 years of experience and no history of mental health issues, stood frozen as the figures observed her. They didn't speak, but she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose emanating from them, as if they were waiting for something, expecting some response she didn't know how to give. After what felt like minutes, but may have been only seconds, the figures turned in unison and walked toward the ocean. Not along the beach, but directly across the pressure ridges and ice formations that would have required careful navigation, even for experienced hunters. They moved as if the terrain posed no obstacle whatsoever. She called her uncle, a community elder named Morris Kagak, who arrived within 20 minutes. Together they searched the area with high-powered flashlights. They found no tracks, no evidence of passage, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. But Morris took his niece's account seriously. He had heard stories, old stories, the kind usually dismissed as folklore or cultural memory, about ancestors who walked when the boundary between worlds grew thin. Stories that were never meant to be literal. He began making quiet inquiries within the community. What he discovered was alarming. 6 other residents had reported similar sightings in the preceding 10 days, encounters they hadn't reported to authorities because the experiences seemed too bizarre, too culturally specific to explain to outsiders. Each witness described figures in traditional dress, moving with unnatural ease across terrain that should have been impassable. Several witnesses claimed to recognize the figures as deceased relatives, identified through family photographs or stories passed down through generations. One woman insisted she saw her grandmother, dead for 43 years, standing near the cemetery at midnight, gesturing toward something in the distance. Morris convened a private meeting on November 23rd with 5 other elders and the witnesses willing to speak. They gathered at his home, and for 3 hours accounts were shared, patterns discussed, and theories debated. The consensus was unsettling. Something was attempting to communicate, and whatever it was, bore the appearance of their ancestors. But communication implied intent, and no one could discern what that intent might be. They agreed to document future encounters, but to maintain discretion until they understood more. They would soon regret that decision. On December 2nd, a hunter named Leo Dunham went missing. Dunham, age 37, had been preparing equipment in his garage when his wife, Claudia, heard him cry out. She rushed outside to find the garage door open and her husband standing motionless in the driveway, staring toward the ocean. She called his name 3 times before he seemed to register her presence. When he finally turned to her, his expression was one of profound confusion mixed with something she couldn't quite identify. Recognition, perhaps, or longing. "They're calling," he said simply. "They want me to come." Before Claudia could respond, Leo began walking. Not urgently, but with steady determination, moving through the snow-covered street toward the edge of town. Claudia tried to stop him, grabbing his arm, pleading with him to return, but he shrugged her off with surprising strength and continued walking. She ran back inside to call for help, reaching Morris Kagak, who lived 3 blocks away. By the time Morris arrived with 2 other men, Leo had reached the old whaling station. They found him standing at the edge of the shore ice, staring out at the frozen ocean. 3 figures stood approximately 50 yards ahead of him on the ice, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. Morris recognized the formation immediately. It matched his niece's description exactly. They called to Leo, but he didn't respond. One of the figures raised a hand, beckoning. Leo took a step forward onto the ice. Morris and the others rushed forward, grabbing Leo and physically restraining him. It took all 3 men to hold him as he struggled with a strength that seemed beyond his normal capability, shouting in what sounded like Inupiaq. Though Leo hadn't spoken the language fluently since childhood. They eventually subdued him and dragged him back to solid ground, but not before all 3 men saw the figures themselves, watching from the ice with impatience that felt ancient and implacable. Leo Dunham was transported to the Samuel Simmons Memorial Hospital, where he remained conscious but unresponsive for 6 hours. When he finally spoke, he claimed to have no memory of the incident. Psychiatric evaluation revealed no signs of psychosis or drug intoxication. His blood work was normal. Brain scans showed no abnormalities. Yet something had compelled him toward the ice with an intensity that required physical intervention to overcome. The incident was reported to the North Slope Borough Police. This time, Sergeant Callahan couldn't dismiss it. He began a formal investigation, interviewing witnesses and documenting the pattern of sightings that had been occurring since mid-November. On December 6th, he contacted the FBI field office in Anchorage, requesting consultation on what he cautiously described as coordinated unusual activity of potential psychological or cultural significance. What happened next accelerated beyond anyone's ability to control. On December 11, a 52-year-old teacher named Lorraine Copeland was found unconscious in her home by her adult daughter. Copeland was breathing, her heart rate and blood pressure normal, but she could not be roused. Emergency responders transported her to the hospital, where physicians discovered something impossible. Her vital signs indicated she was in a deliberately induced comatose state, similar to what might be achieved through certain medications or medical procedures. But toxicology screens came back negative. There were no drugs in her system, no medical explanation for her condition. On her nightstand, investigators found a journal. The final entry, dated December 10th at 11 p.m., described an encounter with her deceased mother, who had appeared outside her bedroom window wearing traditional caribou skin clothing. Copeland wrote that her mother had spoken to her in Inupiaq, telling her to prepare for the crossing. The entry ended mid-sentence. "She's asking me to open the..." Lorraine Copeland remained in that state for 8 days. On December 19th, she woke abruptly, screaming a single phrase in Inupiaq that translates approximately to, "They're already here." She died of cardiac arrest 14 minutes later. The official cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac event of unknown origin. The community was now in full alarm. Federal authorities arrived on December 21st. Not just FBI, but personnel from agencies with less clear jurisdictions, conducting interviews under the authority of Homeland Security protocols and public health investigations. They established a temporary command center at the Borough Administration Building and began systematic documentation of every reported encounter. What they found was a pattern that defied conventional analysis. 23 residents had now reported direct sightings of figures in traditional dress. 17 of those witnesses had identified the figures as deceased relatives. In 12 cases, the identifications were confirmed through comparison with historical photographs or community records, some dating back to the 1920s. The figures appeared most frequently near culturally significant locations: the old whaling station, the cemetery, sites where traditional ceremonies had historically been conducted. But the most disturbing discovery came from GPS and satellite analysis. Federal investigators had begun monitoring known appearance zones with motion detection equipment and infrared surveillance. On the night of December 28th, equipment captured thermal signatures at the whaling station, signatures that registered as human temperature figures, despite no corresponding visual confirmation and no disturbance of snow or ice where the signatures appeared. On January 4, 2007, a 41-year-old man named Seward Aldrich voluntarily walked onto the ice and disappeared. Unlike Leo Dunham, Aldrich was not restrained in time. His wife reported that he left their home at approximately 3 a.m., leaving a note that reads simply, "They've shown me where to go. I have to follow." Despite immediate search efforts involving helicopters, snowmobiles, and trained rescue personnel, no trace of Seward Aldrich was ever found. The ice showed no footprints beyond 100 yards from shore, where his tracks simply ended, as if he had been lifted into the air or ceased to exist. The investigation shifted from documentation to containment. Federal authorities, in consultation with tribal leadership, imposed temporary access restrictions on certain coastal areas, ostensibly for safety reasons. Residents who had experienced encounters were offered intensive psychiatric support and medical monitoring. They were also presented with comprehensive confidentiality agreements, backed by financial compensation packages that reportedly ranged from $50,000 to $200,000, depending on the nature and duration of their experiences. Morris Kagak refused to sign. He spoke privately with federal investigators, sharing what tribal elders believed: that the appearances represented ancestral spirits attempting to reclaim territory or communicate something essential about the land itself. He argued that suppression rather than understanding was the wrong approach. 3 days after that conversation, Morris received a visit from officials representing what they described as cultural preservation interests. The specifics of that conversation were never disclosed, but Morris signed the agreement the following day. Community members who violated the agreements faced immediate consequences. One woman who spoke to a journalist from Anchorage found herself under investigation for unrelated financial irregularities within 48 hours. The message was clear. The encounters diminished rapidly in early 2007, though whether this was due to federal intervention, natural cessation, or simply fear preventing reports is unknown. By March, the surveillance equipment was removed. By June, the temporary restrictions were lifted. Official statements attributed the incidents to mass psychological suggestion, exacerbated by polar night conditions. combined with carbon monoxide exposure from faulty heating systems, affecting multiple households simultaneously. No one who lived through those months believes that explanation. In September 2007, a confidential CDC report, later leaked and quickly suppressed, noted anomalies in the official narrative that suggested deliberate misdirection. The report questioned how carbon monoxide could account for consistent, detailed sightings by multiple witnesses in different locations with working detectors. It noted that thermal signatures captured on federal equipment had never been adequately explained. The report concluded with a recommendation for continued monitoring and an acknowledgement that the phenomenon, while apparently dormant, may represent ongoing risk of unknown origin. Barrow today appears normal, a community that has moved past whatever strange interlude marked those 14 months. Tourism continues, researchers come and go. Life proceeds with the rhythms of Arctic existence. But speak quietly with longtime residents, away from official channels, and a different story emerges. Some claim to still see figures on the ice during the polar night, though no one reports these sightings anymore. Others describe persistent dreams of ancestors calling them toward the ocean. Dreams that feel less like unconscious processing and more like transmissions from somewhere else. The families of Lorraine Copeland and Stuart Aldrich received substantial compensation and remain bound by agreements they cannot discuss. Leo Dunham left Barrow in 2008 and has not returned. Warren Tully, the maintenance worker who filed the first report, moved to Fairbanks and reportedly refuses to discuss that winter with anyone. Morris Kagak died in 2019 at age 78. Before his death, he told his nephew that the ancestral presence never left. It merely stepped back, waiting for a time when the living would be ready to listen. He believed the appearances were not hostile but corrective, an attempt to restore balance to a relationship between land and people that had been disrupted. He also believed that the federal response, whatever its true nature, had merely postponed an inevitable reckoning rather than preventing it. The investigation remains classified. Requests for documentation under FOIA have been denied on grounds of national security and privacy protection. The financial settlements paid to affected residents were processed through channels that obscure their ultimate source, though speculation points to agencies with interests far beyond local law enforcement. What walked the ice near Barrow in 2006 and 2007 was never definitively identified. Whether ancestral spirits, psychological contagion, or something beyond current understanding, the phenomenon left 3 people dead or vanished, and a community permanently altered. The silence imposed through legal agreements ensures that whatever truth exists will remain suppressed, known only to those who lived it, and those whose job is to ensure the rest of us never fully understand. In traditional Inupiaq belief, the boundary between the living and the dead is permeable in certain places at certain times, when the long dark allows what should remain separate to touch. If Morris Kagak was right, that boundary was crossed in Barrow, and what reached through was not random or accidental, but intentional, purposeful, and patient. The cessation of encounters may not represent resolution, but retreat, a temporary withdrawal by something that has all the time in the world to wait for the next attempt. And in a place where winter darkness lasts months and the ice stretches to the horizon without break, waiting is what the land does best. The files for tonight are officially closed, but the Alaskan wilderness remains as vast and unforgiving as ever. These accounts are a chilling reminder that in the most isolated corners of our world, there are secrets the permafrost was never meant to yield. If you have ever experienced something in the shadows that you couldn't explain, or if you have your own story from the last frontier, share it with us in the comments below. We will be returning with more harrowing accounts from across the other 49 states and venturing into the darkest corners of the world to uncover the truths that have been deliberately buried. Whether it is the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest or the ancient mysteries of Europe, no file is too deep for us to reopen. If you found these stories as unsettling as we did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Midnight Creaks to help us continue this global investigation. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a descent into the unexplained, regardless of where on the map we land next. Your support allows us to keep digging for the truths they want to keep hidden. For those of you who are still awake, the mystery continues. You can click the video on your screen now to dive into another collection of harrowing tales. However, if the weight of the night has finally caught up with you, do not worry about reaching for the remote. We will continue the music from here, providing a dark, ambient soundscape to carry you into a deep sleep until we meet again.